To the Buddha for guidance. I go to the Buddha for guidance. I go to the Dharma for guidance. I go to the Dharma for guidance. I go to the Sangha for guidance. I go to the Sangha for guidance. Namu Kiye Butsu. Namu Kiye Butsu. Namu Kiye Ho. Namu Kiye Ho. Namu Kiye So. Namu Kiye So. Namu Amida Butsu. 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 Please be seated.
Please join me in the Jodo Shinshu pledge. I'll do it in Japanese first, followed by English on page 5 and 6. Mihotoke no chikai o shinji, totoi minna o tonae tsutsu. Tsuyoku akaruku ikinukimasu. Mihotoke no chikai o aoi, tsune ni wano ni kairi, kansha no ichi ni harimasu. Mihotoke no shie ni shitagai, tadashi ichi o kikiwakete, makoto no minori o hiromemasu. Mihotoke no megumi o yorokobi, tagai ni yamai tasukeai, shakai no tame ni fushishimasu. In trusting in the vow of the Buddha and reciting the sacred name, I shall proceed through the journey of life with strength and joy. Revering the light of Buddha and reflecting upon my perfect self, I shall strive to live a life of gratitude, following the teaching of Buddha and discerning the right path. I shall spread the true Dharma, rejoicing in the compassion of Buddha, respecting and aiding others. I shall do my best to work toward the welfare of society. Namu Amida Butsu.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Let's see, maybe this is adjusted for Paul. But anyway, welcome to our service today. Actually, today Paula Horii is our speaker. Paula is a Sangha member here at the New York Buddhist Church, and she'll probably talk a little bit about how she came here, but she came here via her husband, who was a member of the church. And when he was very ill, she sought out some kind of spiritual guidance from the New York Buddhist Church, and so Reverend Ikeda, who's here today, came and helped and counseled helped with the transition of her husband. And so I think Paula just felt the warmth of what Jodo Shinshu was and is for her. I came to know Paula through, she and Reverend Earl, Reverend Ikedo were running a program called Talk Story. This started during the pandemic. Are you going to talk about this at all? No. Okay. It started during the pandemic, and it was an interfaith group that got together, first in person, and then when COVID hit, it all went through Zoom. But it was such an interesting experience for me personally to be able to learn, and actually following the guidelines of Talk Story, you just talk. You just talk about what's on your mind, and everybody takes a turn, and people influence each other, and it's just remarkable how open and honest these spiritual leaders were. They came from Muslim, Protestant, Catholic, Zoroastrian, Jewish, Native American, Hindu, and Tibetan Jodo Shinshu, and Tendai Buddhist schools. So it was just such an interesting confluence of talk and ideas, and how people's different perspectives were going on during, actually during the peak of the pandemic, how they were addressing the work in their own communities. And so many were doing wonderful social service work within their communities. So that led to my becoming friends with Paula. I really enjoyed talking to her. Paula is such an ambitious person. I mean, I greatly admire her because after retirement, I mean, she worked in the corporate sector for a long time at American Express, AT&T, I'm sorry, forgive me. Okay, and worked with the former, I guess he was the CEO or the president of Lincoln Center. He became that. But so she has a great deal of experience in communications, but after retirement, she went back to teaching because it's really remarkable. She can lend her expertise, her knowledge to young people, and I think that's what gives her a lot of incentive and happiness. So Paula is a member of our New York Buddhist Church Buddhist Women's Association and has volunteered for a long time with her stepson, Ken Horii, who they work together with Hoshina Seki at the American Buddhist Studies Center. Actually, I admire Paula because she has 3 kids, 9 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren. It's amazing. So she's a busy family person, too, as well. But she's going to talk to you about her perceptions of Buddhist thought in American spiritual thinking poets. So I think it's going to be interesting because we've been sort of exploring that too with our, we just started Buddha Goes to the Movies yesterday online, and just looking at different films, not necessarily, it doesn't have to be just about Buddhism, but it's in general, how can we view Buddhist thinking or Buddhist experiences through popular culture, through our world, our daily world. So it will be interesting to hear Paula's talk today. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you, Cheryl. I'm happy to be here today. Thank you for inviting me. And I value our friendship as well. Good morning to everybody here. Welcome to everyone who's watching online. It's good to be with you. And practically everything I know about Buddhism, I was married to a Buddhist for some 40 years, and he sort of lived his life with the Buddhist values, but I really didn't know that much about Buddhism itself until I did come to the church. I think it was 2015 that I first met Reverend Earl. But I learned a lot from him, thank you, from Reverend Cheryl, from Reverend Isabel, Reverend Gary, through their Dharma messages, through the educational programs offered by the New York Buddhist Church and the American Buddhist Studies Center, but perhaps most enjoyably through the different, many conversations that I had with Reverend Earl and Cheryl and Isabel and Gary, and with members of the Sangha who are here today. And the more I learned about Buddhism, the more I began to explore Buddhist thought in the poems and essays of some of the 19th century writers that I've always admired. Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, Walt Whitman, and Emily Dickinson. They all lived about the same time. And it's not only what they wrote, but it's also how they saw things and how they lived their lives. They sort of lived their lives the Buddha way. They lived a long time ago, but as Virginia Woolf once wrote, poets are always our contemporaries, which to me means that if the poems are really good, universal, they'll stand the test of time and will speak to us and resonate with us, no matter what year or country or century we're living in. And I believe their writings reflected who they were: contemplative, meditative, keen observers of humankind, of nature, of the universe. They just kind of saw it all. Of course, this idea of looking for Buddhist thought or Buddhist teachings in their writing isn't just mine. Others have written at great length about Buddhist, or more to the point, the influences of Asian philosophies and religions in their writings. But today I just wanted to touch on some highlights and give you some of my own impressions. Last Sunday at the Nirvana Day service, Reverend Gary talked about the death of the Buddha and the Buddha's last teaching, and that the Buddha said, "Be a light unto yourself," or "Be an island unto yourself," Gary said. The Buddha said, "Make of yourself a light. Make of yourself a light. Rely upon yourself. Do not depend upon anyone else. Make my teachings your light. Rely upon them. Do not depend on any other teaching." Self-reliance. Emerson wrote about self-reliance. In his essay called Self-Reliance, he wrote, "Trust thyself. Every heart vibrates to that iron string. A man should learn to detect and watch that gleam of light which flashes across his mind from within, more than the luster of the firmament of bards and sages." In addition to being a writer, minister, and philosopher, Emerson was a Unitarian minister, as I think his father and grandfather were as well. But he was also an educator, which first drew me to him once I started teaching after I retired. He wrote an essay called On Education, which I think he gave as a commencement address to some graduates who were going into teaching. And he touched on the importance of self-reliance when he wrote and spoke to these people who were going to become teachers. "I believe that our own experience instructs us that the secret of education lies in respecting the pupil. It is not for you to choose what he shall know, what he shall do. It is chosen and foreordained. And he only holds the key to his own secret. I remember once in one of my classes, I had my students read Emerson's essay on education, and then I gave them an assignment to write their own essay, answering the question, how do you know what you know? How do you know what you know? Can't Google it. Only you know what you know. I got some interesting essays back, but they got it almost instantly. They knew intuitively that the answer lies within, as Emerson said. It's not on their computer, and it's certainly not on their phone. Emerson and Thoreau were transcendentalists, spiritual thinkers, who lived in Concord, Massachusetts, only about 4 hours from here. They both went to Harvard, where they would have read and been influenced by Asian texts in the Harvard Library. There weren't any Buddhist temples at that time in the 19th century in New England, but there were books. And there was also a pretty robust India trade, I believe, also. But if you've never visited Concord, I urge you to go. Not only was it the home of Emerson and Thoreau, but also of Nathaniel Hawthorne and Louisa May Alcott, who's best known as the author of the popular novel Little Women. Her father, Bronson Alcott, was also a transcendentalist, as were others. And at one point, the group started a magazine called The Dial and published articles on Western thought, but also on Eastern thought, Hindu and Buddhist. The last time I visited Concord, it's been a few years, but Louisa May Alcott's house is still intact the way it was when she grew up. And her father had a philosophy school, and the school was still there kind of up the hill. Concord is also known for the famous shot heard round the world, the battles of Lexington and Concord, fought on April 19, 1775, which started the American Revolutionary War. And I just realized this morning we're celebrating President's Weekend this weekend. So it's a great tourist spot for both history and literary buffs alike, but also for environmentalists. The scenery is beautiful in that area, especially in the fall. It's surrounded by nature, which Thoreau wrote about a lot, nature. The interconnectedness and interdependence of all forms of life, and the changeability of nature, impermanence. One of his best-known works is Walden, based on the 2 years he spent thinking deeply and living simply in harmony with nature in a cabin he built himself at Walden Pond at Concord on land owned by Emerson. In a way, the time he spent at Walden Pond was an experiment in self-reliance. He wrote in his book, Walden, "I went to the woods because I wanted to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived." And in a poem on nature, he wrote, "O nature, I'd rather be thy child in the forest wild than be the king of men elsewhere." Thoreau wrote many poems on nature, and he has been compared to the famous 17th century Japanese haiku master Gassho, who was also inspired by nature and the simple life. Another poem from Thoreau's book, Walden. "Men say they know many things, but lo, they have taken wings, the arts and sciences and 1,000 appliances. The wind that blows is all that anybody knows. The wind that blows is all that anybody knows." Sounds a little bit like Bob Dylan, doesn't it? Blowing in the wind. The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. Deep listening, wisdom. Emerson and Thoreau, as well as Whitman and Dickinson, lived during the American Civil War, 100 years later, after the Revolutionary War. And Emerson and Thoreau were lifelong abolitionists. While at Walden Pond, Thoreau wrote an essay called Civil Disobedience, which later had a deep impression on Mahatma Gandhi and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Isn't that something? Great ideas, thoughts, put into words, put into action. Walt Whitman was a volunteer nurse during the Civil War. And he cared for both Union and Confederate soldiers. And he wrote letters for them while they lay wounded, writing letters for them, sending to their families at home. He had compassion. That's who he was. In his poem, Song of Myself, he wrote, "I do not ask the wounded person how he feels. I myself become the wounded person. I do not ask the wounded person how he feels. I myself become the wounded person." Empathy, compassion. In that same poem, he also wrote about self-reliance and interconnectedness. "I celebrate myself and sing myself, and what I assume you shall assume, for every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you." And later in that same poem, "I am large, I contain multitudes." He felt at one with all of humankind and the world, with the universe. At the end of the Civil War, after President Lincoln was assassinated, Whitman wrote his famous poem, "O Captain, my Captain, our fearful trip is done. The ship has weathered every wreck. The prize we sought is won. The port is near, the bells I hear, the people all exulting, while follow eyes the steady keel, the vessel grim and daring. But oh heart, 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 oh the bleeding drops of red, where on the deck my captain lies, fallen, cold, and dead." Victory and loss, suffering and death. Whitman's formal education was much different from Emerson's and Thoreau's. He was largely self-taught. A lot of people considering the greatest poet in American literature, but he barely made it through the 4th grade. He began working at the age of 12, learned the printing trade, and that's when he fell in love with the written word, and he later became a journalist. But he was a voracious reader. He most likely also read Asian texts. He knew Emerson, he was inspired by Emerson. His work is considered to be part of the transition between transcendentalism and realism. Whitman was born on Long Island and wrote many poems about New York City, particularly its people. New York City was surrounded by people then and now, even more now. In his poem, Crossing Brooklyn Ferry, he writes about the crowds of men and women attired in the usual costumes on the ferry boats, the hundreds and hundreds that cross, 100 years hence, or ever so many 100 years hence, others will see them. He knew that we would be doing the same thing. And finally, Emily Dickinson, the 4th writer that I admire so much. She was influenced by transcendentalism as well, and she's also known in her poetry for bridging the gap from transcendentalism to realism. She lived in Amherst, Massachusetts. She was educated at Mount Holyoke, but she only spent about a year there. She was a prolific writer, just as Emerson, Thoreau, and Whitman were. But unlike them, most of her work was not published until after she died, when her family discovered about 1,800 poems hidden away, neatly stitched together in kind of neat little packets, just kind of tied up. They just sort of found them. So they were published after she died. During most of her adult life, she was a recluse. Emily Dickinson was a recluse. She rarely left her bedroom, and she dressed all in white. Her self-isolation gave her plenty of time to write poetry, to think, which she didn't give titles to, she just kind of numbered them. But they're considered among the greatest in the history of American literature. She wrote about nature, impermanence, suffering, death. One of her most famous poems goes, "Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality." Another famous poem reminds me of the Buddhist idea of self, no self, non-self. I'm nobody. Who are you? Are you nobody too? Then there's the two of us. Don't tell. They'd banish us, you know. How dreary to be somebody. How public, like a frog. To tell your name the lifelong June to an admiring bog. And on suffering, she wrote, "As old as woe." How old is that? How old is suffering? Oh, about 18,000 years. As old as bliss, joy, enlightenment. How old is that? They are of equal years. Together, chiefest, they are found, but seldom side by side. From neither of them, though he try, can human nature hide. As Buddha in his time confronted the realities of sickness, old age, and death, the essence of his teachings can be found in the Four Noble Truths, which Reverend Gary also talked about last Sunday, and the Eightfold Path. The fourth Noble Truth provides the guide to the end of suffering and the path to enlightenment through following the Eightfold Path, which of course are right view, right thought, right speech, right behavior, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Right view, right thought, right speech, right behavior, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Wow. When I spoke to Cheryl a couple of weeks ago about my talk today, she made the point that right view is especially emphasized, and that there's a reason why it's the first. It's clearing your mind of cobwebs and seeing things as they truly are, and understanding your relationship to everything in the world. I thought that was pretty good. Seeing things as they truly are. I like to think that's what the great poets like Emerson, Thoreau, Whitman, and Dickinson gave us in their writings. Right view. Maybe that's the lens that they were looking through. And Thoreau wrote in his book, Walden, "It's not what you look at that matters, it's what you see." It's not what you look at that matters, it's what you see. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. That was really beautiful. I think, it's wonderful that we have, in our Sangha, we're thinking about how Buddhism affects us in our daily life, in everything that we do, and that we can see the truths in everything around us. We can see the truths in, our interaction with other people. Like yesterday when we were looking at the Big Lebowski, I said, what does that have to do with Buddhism? But we were discovering all sorts of things. And I think, the perspective, when you are a Buddhist, you start seeing things differently. You start seeing things more clearly. And and it kind of opens up a whole world for you in a different worldview, I think, which is remarkable. So thank you so much for sharing your perspective and also the teachings that we learned from the great American poets of that period. Thank you. It would be nice to be able to share this with more people too. So maybe we'll try to put some of it on online or in our MailChimp. So we'll continue with our Gathas. Ondokusan 2 on page 134 and Nembutsu on page 135. So please stand if you are able. So this concludes our service for today. And this is the portion of the service that we would like to welcome newcomers. And so if you're here for the first time, could you stand up, introduce yourself, and let us know how you came to be here? I think we have a few. Please, right there.
Hi, my name is Joshua Keating. I came here from Manhattan College just to look into other religions and honestly write about this. Mm-hmm. And for a first time, I thought this was actually very nice, very beautiful. It's something very different, and I'm not very used to this. So honestly, I thank you for this service, and maybe sometime I would be back here again.
Thank you. Welcome. Okay, we have all old-timers here. So welcome, Josh. And we would like to thank our the people who assisted us with the service today. Our greeters, Hiroki Hasegawa and Scott Kitajima. Thank you so much. Piano, it was John Skelly. Thank you, John. Our technician, the one who does all the remarkable things with our technology and gets our live stream up on Facebook and YouTube, David Brady. Thank you so much. And of course, all the assistants with the minister's assistants here. Paula, thank you so much for that beautiful, beautiful message that you gave to us today. We have on the Onaijin today Aaron Prophet, who is a member of the Albany Buddhist Sangha, and he's right now preparing to go to Japan for the ordination, so we look forward to that happening too. And Nobuko Kodama, who is always the big, strong voice when we're chanting, so thank you so much. Upcoming events that we'll have next month for our first Sunday in March, our Shotsuki Hoyo, our speaker will be Reverend Todd Tsuchiya, who is a minister at the Midwest Buddhist Temple in Chicago. He's really a wonderful speaker, so welcome to him. Reverend Ron Miyamura will be coming for, let's see, I know there's a special service coming up, but he'll be also speaking to us, I think it's Higane in March. He'll be coming for that also from Chicago. Maybe, I think in April we'll be celebrating the favorite service for a lot of our young people, Hana Matsuri. So it's our flower festival, the celebration of the Buddha's birth. So we have a beautiful Hanami-do that we decorate with flowers on that occasion. So look forward to that. So thank you all for joining us today. Oh, actually, today when I was talking to Paula, we remembered that today is the day of remembrance for Japanese Americans. This was the day 81 years ago, that the Executive Order 9066 went up, and the posters went all over the Japanese American community. They were ordered to go into concentration camps. So this is the day that we remember that. I know that there are members in our own Sangha who lived in those concentration camps, and maybe someday they'll share with us their story too as well. So let's just remember that too as we go about our day today. Thank you so much. Please join me in Gassho. Namu Amida Butsu. Namu Amida Butsu. Namu Amida Butsu. Namandabs. Thank you.